Cabot. Some of you might know me from books that probably didn't make you cry, such as The Princess Diaries. Thank you for those of you who cried. I hope it wasn't on an airplane while you were watching the Disney movie. I have had men come up to me and said when they were bringing their daughters to book signings, I saw that movie on a plane, and I cried. It's Julie Andrews, what can you do? Okay, so I have written a lot of books. You may be familiar with them. I think it's up to 75 now. But for as many books as I've written, I have probably twice that many that have not been published. Because I love to write since I was a little kid, about 7 years old. Actually, Maggie and I were discussing this, that both, when we were 7, we both wrote books about dogs. And neither of them have been published, I don't believe. The film rights are still available to mine. But I also love to draw, and so, you know, I would illustrate all my own stories. And one of the things about writing was that I grew up in a family where my mother was Irish and my father's Italian. And those are cultures of storytelling. And when you came home from school, you had to sit at the dinner table. We were not allowed to have the TV on. And you had to tell about your day. And if you told the most entertaining story, you got the most utmost attention. And it was a very large family, also Catholic. And that's just what I knew. And so I would also write these stories down. But the problem was, when I was in school, I would continue to make up these stories to entertain my family instead of paying attention in school. And you're not really rewarded so much for that in math class. And one of the stories that I was particularly obsessed with was the myth of Persephone. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with that, but... Oh, I see some hands. Okay. I would draw on my algebra notebook the characters from the myth of Persephone, which is Hades, who's the god of death, and Persephone, whose mom is Demeter, the goddess of springtime. And Demeter didn't want her daughter Persephone to hang out at Olympus, which is where all the gods lived, because they're a little bit naughty. And I don't know if you're familiar with the myths, but a lot of the girls in Greek myths end up being turned into a tree or an animal or something. So I didn't really like myths in general, because I didn't like the way the girls end up in them. But I really like the myth of Persephone because, unfortunately, not to give away the ending of the myth of Persephone, but she ends up in the underworld with the god of the dead, and she ends up being queen of the underworld, which I thought was really empowering. It's much better than being, you know, a tree. But there's also a really hopeful aspect to it, because she also ends up being, you know, a goddess of springtime, which is, you know, that's not a bad thing to have happen. And since I kind of felt like, since I was getting really bad grades in math, because of my obsession with doodling in my math notebook instead of paying attention, I kind of felt a little bit like Persephone, just because, not like I was the queen of the underworld, unfortunately, which I really would have liked, but I felt like an outsider, because, you know, all of my friends were getting really good grades, I wasn't. It was Indiana, and my brother was 6'8". I don't know if you know about Indiana basketball, but he was basically like the captain of the basketball team, and I didn't understand how to play basketball. So it was really upsetting, and I was just like, gosh, I feel like this really big outsider. And I think that a lot of teens, I don't know today, maybe, but I've noticed a lot of people, you know, there's a lot of emphasis on getting good grades, and a lot of people maybe feel the same way I did, a little bit like an outsider. So I was really attracted to this myth, and I've always kind of thought, wow, I would really like to write kind of a modern, updated version of the myth of Persephone, about a girl maybe who feels a little bit like an outsider, and I don't know, maybe she meets a guy who feels a little bit like an outsider too, like maybe, I don't know, he's Lord of the Dead or something. And he's a teenager too, and maybe they connect in some weird way. And it takes place in a modern high school, I don't know. It's certainly something I wanted to have happen to me when I was... never did. But I think that's the great thing about writing, when you're really kind of sad, and you're sitting there in math class, and your dad's a math professor, and he's like, how can you be my kid? I don't understand it. You're like, Dad, it's going to be okay. And he's like, no, it's not. Really, I don't see how it is. You know, and then I ended up getting really bad SAT scores. And I got into one college, and it was the one where my dad taught at. I was like, I'm going to major in creative writing. And I went to a party after I graduated from high school, and there were all these college people there, and I was trying to act really cool, like I was in college too. And I met this guy, and he's like, hey, what's your major? And I'm like, I'm not in college yet, I'm still in high school. I'm going to be a writer, because I love to write. And he went, okay, I'm a creative writing major. Don't be a creative writing major. At Indiana University, they will suck all the love of writing out of you. I believed him, because I was still in high school. And I went to Indiana University, and I did not take a single English class, which actually turns out you have to graduate. Which is why it took me 6 years to graduate. But, because I was like so terrified, I was like, no, I can't take English, because they're going to suck the love of writing out of me. But anyway, I majored in art. P.S. Really hard to get a job in art when you graduate. Okay, but that's another part of the story. So I went to college, I loved it, I had a great time, and then I finally did graduate after 6 years. And I moved to New York City to be an artist, and I met that guy again, and I married him. Okay, but I was still writing all the time, and he noticed that, and he's like, you write a lot. Maybe you should try to get published. And I was like, no, because they'll reject me. And I had, such low self-esteem from college and from high school. And, not really ever being able to get good grades or pass math or anything. And what happened was my dad died, totally out of the blue. I know. It was really sad. And I went to the funeral, and I realized when I was sitting there that life is really short, and you don't have a lot of time. And if there's something you've always wanted to do, you can't listen to the people who say that you're not good at something or you're not necessarily the best at something. You need to try. So when I got home from the funeral, I started sending out some of my books that I've been writing. Not Benny the Puppy, but some of the other ones. And you will never guess what happened. I got rejected so much. Every day I would come home and there would be a rejection letter in the mail, and I was like, what is going on? For like 4 years this was happening, and I turned to my husband and I was like, what, should I just give up? I mean, this is so ridiculous. And he said, Meg, listen, I love golf. I love to play golf, but you know what, I'm never going to be Tiger Woods. I'm not allowed to tell that story anymore. I just did. And I said, and he said, but just because I'm never going to be Tiger Woods, that doesn't mean I'm going to quit golf. I love it. I'm going to keep playing. If you love writing, why don't you just keep doing it and keep sending those stories out? And who cares what the other people say? And I said, you're right. And that's when my mom called. She said, Meg, I am dating one of your art professors. Thank you for that, because it is disgusting. And they're still going out, by the way. It is so gross. They live together. I just see my art teacher in his underwear all the time. Thank you. Great. So P.S. I wrote a book about that. It's called The Princess Diaries. I know you all think it's about a princess. It is not. I threw in the princess thing to make you read it. Really about a girl whose mom is dating her teacher, and how disgusted she is by it. But that got published, and it was amazing when I got that phone call saying that I had gotten a book published. And I went out onto my balcony in New York City, which was in a huge complex, because it was a studio apartment, just one room, where I lived with my husband for years. And I went, oh my gosh, I got published! And everyone who lived in the complex was like, yeah, big deal. We're all published too. So, but the amazing thing is that I stuck with it, and even feeling like the outsider that I was, it turns out we're all kind of outsiders in a way. And I incorporated that into Abandon, which is a book about a girl who is an outsider because she dies. But it's not. She dies. But she gets resuscitated. And then she has to try to live life, having had this horrible thing happen to her, and knowing what happens to us after we die, which I did a lot of research on what happens to people when they have a near-death experience. And it is really weird because some people see a light, some people rise above their beds and see themselves laying there, and in this particular case, Pierce went to the underworld, and she had an experience where somebody follows her back from there, and he wants to maybe bring her back there, even though she's still alive. So she has to start over at a whole new high school, which is something that I had to do a couple times. In fact, I lived for a year in Carmel. I know. Some of you might be familiar with the Mediator series. She takes place there. So it's a kind of experience I think that we've all had, where you've just, you're trying to fit in and you can't, but maybe in the end you triumph, because one of the things about being Persephone is that she was the goddess of springtime. So there's always hope, and you can't abandon it. Thank you so much for listening, and now...